involve prophetic callings and prophetic experiences. And so will next week's readings, so that's a spoiler alert for the Archdeacon's sermon. Ezekiel was one of the stranger prophets in the Bible. We all know, I think, the famous vision of the Valley of Dry Bones in chapter 37 of the book. But Ezekiel also has visions of God's heavenly chariot throne, so odd that some people have thought that they must represent drug trips or UFO experiences. And at least 2 chapters of the book are regarded as especially unsuitable for public reading because of their graphic sexual descriptions. That will get you looking at the book, won't it? Other more suitable sections can be more tedious too. These include 8 chapters at the end of the book describing the future temple that God will build, along with a lot of rather boring but highly symbolic architectural detail. The first reading we had today follows on from Ezekiel's first vision of God's chariot throne and the weird creatures that accompany it. This part of the book is more straightforward, and it describes Ezekiel's calling to be God's prophet to the first group of people who were exiled from Judah to Babylon in the early 6th century. In the Hebrew form of the book, God constantly refers to Ezekiel as, in Hebrew, Ben Adam, which the NRSV translates as mortal, but unfortunately it misses some of the important resonances to the word. Ben in Hebrew means son, Adam means human, and of course it's the name of the first human in the creation accounts in Genesis, Adam. Think of the animals in Narnia referring to the children as sons of Adam and daughters of Eve. It's a biblical concept. Ben Adam can also be translated, if we're being rather non-inclusive, as son of man. And of course you'll recognise that, I think. It links very directly to the title that the Gospel writers record that Jesus used of himself, the Son of Man. Usually people make the connection between Jesus and the heavenly figure in Daniel chapter 7, called Son of Man in Aramaic rather than Hebrew, rather than making a link with Ezekiel. But there are important links between Ezekiel and Jesus as well, and especially between our Old Testament and Gospel readings today. Ezekiel's calling is to give divine messages to his own people, a nation that's described in the text as rebellious, whether they will listen or not. In the case of Jesus, he tries to preach and teach in his own hometown, but no one there can get over the fact that he's a mere local and they know all his family members. So he can't possibly have anything important to say to them. But there is an irony at a deeper level of the text. The people ask where he got his wisdom from, since they know him as a carpenter, or word in Greek would mean a builder. Yet in the book of Proverbs, in a very striking and quite well-known passage in chapters 8 and 9, wisdom, who is described as God's first creation, is described as building her own house and sending out servants to invite simple people to enter, to join her feast and learn understanding. So my impression of this passage is that Mark is hinting that Jesus didn't merely learn wisdom, he is this divine wisdom himself, calling people to the feast of understanding. But they take him for granted because he's a local, they refuse to respond, they're unable to see beyond his exterior form. A prophet is called by God to present God's message to people. This is often a message of judgment, of course, but it's sent in order not to punish, but to save those who are willing to listen, to bring them into a right relationship with God and other people. The truth in such a message can be painful to accept. We rarely want to hear something if it will cost us in some way, and especially if we are required to change the way we behave. It's much easier to live in denial or in apathy. Hence, I think the vilification of COVID scientific experts like Chris Whitty and in the States, Anthony Fauci, when they make recommendations to the government on the basis of what they consider to be trustworthy data with important outcomes. And also those people who've been warning for decades about the dangers of climate change to the planet, but who have been ignored because we haven't wanted to believe that the message was true or so deadly, or we were unwilling or unable to change the way we live and behave before it became too late. Testing prophecies and prophets is absolutely necessary, of course. Christians are not called to be gullible. But once we have examined the messenger and the message, we have a responsibility to act, even if action is not easy. We need the grace and wisdom of God to make us responsive, trusting that God will help us to do what needs to be done. Amen.